In this video, we're going to create a set of module-level learning outcomes for our course for Module 2, and we're also going to tell the student what they need to do in order to achieve those learning outcomes. So you'll notice in Module 2, we scroll down here, that it just jumps right into the module notes, and there aren't really any activities in the module yet. We'll be adding the activities a little later on, but they've already been created. So let's take a look at what those are. There's basically two new activities that the student will be doing. There is a copyright scenarios activity where they discuss some copyright scenarios with the rest of the class. And then they're going to be answering some questions about one of the copyright scenarios and uploading their answers to a Dropbox folder. So let's look at the Dropbox folder for that. And we see that they'll be getting a text file, which is right here, copyright scenarios, and they'll be answering these kinds of questions about it. Now, in terms of the content of the module that's there already, we see that there's some information about the Teach Act, and there are some copyright scenarios that they'll be discussing. So here are the scenarios. And so those are the things, the activities that we want to relate back to the learning outcomes for this module. Now we also want to take a look at the course level learning outcomes, which are in the syllabus. So under learning outcomes, we see that the course level learning outcomes are having reviewed college guidance on copyright, identify key principles of copyright including fair use in the Teach Act. So this is something that we're going to be doing in Module 2. Identify services available at the college to help with copyright issues. That's actually covered in Module 1, so we're not going to be referencing that learning outcome. And then, given several scenarios that present potential copyright issues, identify whether or not an issue exists, the reason why or why not, and what the instructor in that situation should do to stay on the right side of the law. So this is another activity that we're going to be doing in Module 2, so that supports this learning outcome. So now we have a handle on what the learning outcomes are going to be in Module 2. Let's go ahead and actually create an intro page. So if I go back to Content and down to Module 2, I can also just click on Week 2 module. I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to make the name be, the title be, Module 2 Intro. And then, rather than just starting from scratch, I'm going to copy from an existing file. And under Course Offering Files, you'll see a folder called HTML Templates. And one of these HTML templates is a template intro. So if I start here, I'm going to get properly formatted a properly formatted document that has the consistent look and feel with the rest of the course and also satisfies some accessibility requirements in terms of the markup. We'll be talking about accessibility more when we get to Standard 8. So let me just go ahead and start editing this. And for my brief paragraph here, I'm going to say, welcome to Module 2. In this module, we'll look at the Teach Act and examine 3 scenarios involving copyright law. So in your mini course, you're going to be having some student services scenarios, and then you're going to be asking the student to comment on one of those scenarios. So at the end of this learning module, you will be able to let me actually go back and in a separate tab, I want to actually have my course level learning outcomes right there. And I'm just going to copy them. Since this course only has 2 modules, the week level learning outcomes are really close to the course level learning outcomes. So at the end of this learning module, you will be able to identify key principles of copyright, including fair use in the Teach Act, and identify whether or not an issue exists. So I'm actually going to break this into a couple of smaller learning outcomes. So identify whether or not an issue exists, the reasons why not, and what the instructor should do to stay on the right side of the law. Actually, that sounds okay. So we'll just have those 2 in this module. And then the learning activities are going to be the order of the tasks that the student should be performing. So they're going to begin by reading the notes and about applying the Copyright Act, and then about the Teach Act, and there's a link to a little expert system for determining whether a scenario is covered by the Teach Act. And then they're going to examine the copyright scenarios and discuss them with the class, so I'll be adding that later. And finally, they're going to be answering questions about one of those copyright scenarios. Okay, so read the lecture notes for Module 2, read information about the Teach Act, examine 3 copyright scenarios, discuss these copyright scenarios with the rest of the class, and answer questions about one of these scenarios. Let's make this 2. Upload your answers to the Dropbox. So after performing those activities, the student should be able to master the learning outcomes. And then I also want to make sure that this is Module 2 at the bottom. And I'm going to publish it. Now, if I go back to my Content tab, I see that this new module, or this new topic that I created, has been added, but it's at the bottom. So I'm just going to grab this handle here and move it up, and I want it to come at the very top. Great, so now we have the Module 2 intro, followed by notes, some learning resources, copyright scenarios, then I'm going to have my 2 activities, and the conclusion.